Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
I'm Alex.
Alex, we have only a few days before football starts. And as we know, during this time, rosters do come into focus. And to our listeners, as always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please subscribe to us on the socials. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and Threads with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, with all of that being said, what do we have on today's show?
Today we have 49ers quarterback news. We have Jonathan Taylor updates. We have a Josh Jacobs update. And we have signings and cuts from around the league following the cut day deadline that was Tuesday, the 29th. So we will be covering any fantasy relevant cuts. We really won't be talking about that much on the practice squad. Some things, but not everything, because it's not fantasy relevant right now. So we can start with some of the big items here with the 49ers. They named Sam Darnold as their backup QB over Trey Lance and traded Trey Lance to the Dallas Cowboys for a fourth-round pick. So that was very intriguing that they gave up on a quarterback that they spent so much capital, 3 first-round picks, to acquire. Never really panned out with them. Whether they didn't give him enough try or give him enough go, we don't know. But he never really seemed to fit in with Shanahan's offense, and he couldn't really stay healthy. Now he goes to be probably the primary backup behind Dak Prescott. Maybe he can outplay Dak at some point. It seems like a potential upside for Dallas, but low risk because at a minimum he's a cheap backup option. Sam Darnold is your boy. You want to talk about Sam Darnold and Trey Lance here?
So I believe that Sam was the best quarterback in camp this year, but they're going to default to Purdy being the guy going into week 1 just because Purdy was the guy at the end of the season last year, and he does seem to have made strides to be able to start week 1. But Lance moving on made a lot of sense. It just, at this point in the offseason, I didn't know where it made sense for him to go. As soon as Darnold signed, Darnold won the number 2 job. They weren't really looking to keep a third quarterback on the roster, especially a third quarterback that's a first-round pick, and trying to coach him up. It just really wasn't fair at this point with this roster for Lance to be on there any longer, and he did request the trade, but Dallas was the only team that came through with a 4th-round pick. A lot of teams were willing to do a 6th-round pick that would bump up to a 5th if the certain qualifiers were hit. I do believe Lance gets a new fresh start in Dallas, and hopefully he begins to start taking the steps forward to becoming a starting quarterback in this league.
Yeah, it's tough for Lance because, including college, he was injured 3 of the last 4 years. In that first year, he was a backup for Jimmy Garoppolo. So he really hasn't had that much NFL experience. He hasn't had that much playing experience in general. There's a lot of flaws to his game, and he just didn't seem like he could pick up the Shanahan offense. So they had to admit their mistake and trade him to the team that offered him the most compensation, which was Dallas. Interestingly enough, I think the Bills were second with a 5th-round pick. So the Bills tried to acquire him as well. But he's going behind an established starter. He's going to have a chance to rehab his value, potentially if something happens to Dak, or if for whatever reason Dallas decides not to extend Dak. Trey could be a low-risk, high-upside replacement, or at a bare minimum, a solid backup for them. That's what they're hoping for. Darnold, like you said, has been the best quarterback during the offseason for that program, partly because Lance hasn't played very well and partly because Purdy was hurt most of the offseason. So there is that to factor in. But Darnold does seem like a similar style quarterback to maybe like Kirk Cousins, maybe a discount Cousins. And Kirk Cousins is someone who Shanahan had a lot of success with. So Darnold and Purdy will be the guys they roll with. And both of those guys are good enough to get the 49ers going forward because their roster's stacked with talent.
Yeah, really exciting times, and they have a Super Bowl roster, and the offense just doesn't fit Trey Lance's style of play. Time to move on to our next item. What do we have next?
All right. So we have more Jonathan Taylor drama. As you guys know by this point, he did request a trade. The Colts set the trade deadline for Tuesday the 29th, which was both the cut day and the deadline to place him on the pup. So they tried to see if there was any value out there. Obviously, they wanted a similar package to what McCaffrey went for, and they wanted close to a first round value. No one was willing to offer that for him because they had to also pay Jonathan Taylor. And if he really is hurt, nobody wants to pony up for an injured running back like that. There's very interesting and intriguing aspects to this, whereas did the Colts actually want to trade him? That's something that I think you can dive into. I think that they're kind of playing hardball with him and they're trying to make a stance more so than do the right thing for the player and the team. I don't think that this is necessarily the best business decision. I think that they're best moving on from him, getting what they can, getting more than a third round compensation pick for him, and just trying to move on to potentially a younger running back like Hull, who played pretty decently in preseason, seeing what they have there, and maybe using that compensation to improve the offensive line, improve the defense, maybe help bring in a wide receiver. And that is interesting because they did try to get Jalen Waddle in return for Taylor, which is kind of a laughable move on their part. Jeff, what do you think about the Jonathan Taylor situation here? Do you think the Colts actually wanted to trade him? Do you think they want to keep him? What's going in their minds, in your opinion?
So there's a lot going on here. So first, it started with Taylor requesting a trade, the Colts saying, no, we will not trade you. Taylor coming in and saying he had an injury and them threatening to put him on the NFI list. And then him being excused 2 separate times from practice. Basically, that doesn't really happen much. You don't go get rehab off of the team facilities. Like they just don't allow that to happen. But that did happen in this case. And then, as he was supposed to come back, they're like, oh, wait, you can go find a trade. So he went and found some trade offers that were going to compensate him the best way and a good fit for Taylor. He brought the trade offers back to Indy, which they obviously negotiated with the team. And the rumor out there is that they asked for Jalen Waddle in return from the Dolphins, which that's never going to happen in a million years. Waddle is a staple there. He's part of what makes that offense work. And you're not going to add a fourth usable running back and lose a receiver that you absolutely need. So I think that was a non-starter. But then to end it, the Colts didn't trade him. The deadline passed, which was on Tuesday. And basically they left him on the pup list, which means that he misses 4 weeks. And now the Colts are saying they want to repair the relationship with Taylor, which I don't know is possible at this point, but they are going to try and do that. And we're going to see where it goes. He's out at least the first 4 weeks. And supposedly he still has some ankle soreness, which we can neither confirm or deny at this point. But that is what the Colts are saying and sticking to. So if he really does have ankle soreness and ankle issues still from what he had last year, that's really concerning. And if I was any team, I wouldn't trade for him. And also, if I was the Colts, I wouldn't give him a deal. So maybe the ankle is coming a little bit into play on this here. I do anticipate him putting some tape down for the Colts this year to be able to audition himself for his next deal, whether it's the tag or if the Colts let him hit free agency next year. Did I summarize that all correctly? Because that was like a lot going on in this saga.
I think so. I just want to throw out the fans' guesses on what the situation is with the pup list, because there's 3 things that the pup list could be for, or the reason why they put him on the pup list. One, it could be a ploy from Jonathan Taylor's side saying, "You guys aren't going to pay me. I'm hurt," and them not willing to go full NFI, put him on the pup list. Or the Colts could be trying to shelf him and keep him healthy so they can trade a healthy Jonathan Taylor when other running backs around the league get hurt. Or he really could be hurt and they really needed him to have that time off to recover and be effective when he comes back. As far as repair the situation with him, the only way they can do that is pay him or trade him. So I don't think that they can resolve it outside of those 2 options. So it'll be interesting how that works out. as far as what is a possible resolution, do you think it's likely they actually give him a contract? Do you think it's likely that they trade him? Do you think it's likely that they franchise tag him and kind of string him along year by year? Like, what do you think is the most likely outcome?
So what I think Irsay wanted to do, at least initially, was do the franchise tag route. And I don't know if that is possible right now, but that does seem like an option that he was looking into and looking forward to be able to tag him for one, maybe even 2 seasons. I don't know if it's possible at this point to tag him. But as far as a trade goes, that your guess is as good as mine on that, because I don't see him getting traded between, well, he's not going to get traded between now and when he comes off the pup list. Is he going to be able to pass a physical? That's like the very first question that we would be asking, because that's required when there's a trade. So if he can't pass a physical, then what does that mean going forward? It's just anyone's guess at this point. Like, what if he really can't pass a physical? Like, that would be really bad.
That would be really bad, but I would feel great knowing that I have 0 shares of him across all of my leagues. So that would be the one positive for me. Outside of that, let's not forget that the McCaffrey trade happened mid-season. So it is possible that they could still do a trade mid-season. I don't think that they'd do the franchise tag because that would be keeping a disgruntled running back or just a player in general on their team for 2 consecutive seasons, which I don't think is healthy for roster morale. And I think that that could send the wrong message to players on the team, vital players like Michael Pittman, who is going to be up for contract as well, that he may want to go somewhere else. And this is a franchise that basically ran off Andrew Luck, the best quarterback they had since Peyton Manning. He has no desire to come back to them. He retired rather than stay with them or work out a trade. So I think this is a team. Let's not forget Stephon Gilmore wanted out after only being there for a season. Philip Rivers didn't want to come back. Matt Ryan was an ultimate failure. So there's a lot of star players that have issues with the Colts organization. And this Jonathan Taylor situation isn't making it better for potential free agents or anyone wanting to go to the Colts in the future if they can't treat their players well. So I think that's something for them to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to remember, when the Panthers traded McCaffrey last year, it was because everything had went wrong with their season. Darnold didn't work, Baker didn't work. There was a lot that just didn't work. So if the wheels had fallen off by the point that they had made that trade, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Oh, well, you're the one who has a lot of skepticism for Anthony Richardson. You don't think the wheels could fall off pretty easily for the Colts? I think the wheels already have in some regards. So it doesn't make sense for me them not trading him at this point. That's something we'll keep an
Agreed.
eye on. I don't know if it's Ursay being stubborn or whether they actually do want him, but we'll find out.
Yeah, and I think you've pointed this out. Like, who's steering the ship? Is it the owner or the GM? So a good question to be asked, and we need an answer to that.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on to the other disgruntled running back out there, and that is Josh Jacobs returned to the Raiders. They agreed to enhance that tag. They added an additional 2 million in incentives to bring him back. It's no coincidence in my mind that this came after Tom Brady officially became a minority owner in the Raiders. So maybe the poorest owner in the league got additional cash that he was finally able to pay one of his 2 best star players. So now he's back for the year. I don't think that they tag him 2 years in a row because it would be more money than what they paid him this year. It's a 1 year stopgap, in my opinion, but it keeps the Raiders afloat and potentially being competitive this year. Jeff, what do you think about the Josh Jacobs news of him coming back?
I think this is great for the Raiders because they do have probably two of the top 15 weapons in the league with Adams and Jacobs. I think that if Jimmy Garoppolo is even remotely competent this year, then they have a chance to at least be a better team than we think they will be. They added also Jacoby Myers, and they also have Hunter Renfro returning. So they have enough weapons and enough pieces to be able to put up points on offense. But it's great that Jacobs is back. And I think one thing that we disagree on with the running back market isn't that teams don't want to pay running backs. They just don't want to pay running backs more than 1 year at a time. And I think that's an important distinction, and that's why that franchise tag is being used left and right now with running backs.
So what you're saying is it was a horrible mistake for the players to agree to the franchise tag for 7 years. And it's crazy to me that, what was it, a 10-year agreement? There's 7 years left of the CBA. So they are stuck with the franchise tag being an option. And if the running back market is declining for contracts, then the franchise tag is going to get cheaper and cheaper other than tagging someone consecutively.
Absolutely. Did you know that there's 1,696 players active in the NFL at any given time on the 53-man rosters? So at most 32 players would be tagged, and I don't believe the NFL is going to make a change for 1% of the league, and that's the 32 players that could potentially be franchise tag. Now, if we drill that down even further, there's probably only 4 or 5 or 6 folks that get franchise tagged every year. So I think like the franchise tag when they go into negotiations is a very moot point because it only deals with that small fraction of their population of the union. So, and they have to address for the entire union.
But you're focusing only on running backs. I think that the franchise tag is detrimental to any player that's about to be tagged, no matter the position, because they can no longer enter the free market and get the best deal that they can. Lamar Jackson was franchise tagged, and he didn't have the option to be able to negotiate with other teams. So he potentially could have gotten a better deal than what the Ravens gave him. So it's not just running backs, it's also quarterbacks and wide receivers, tight ends. There's a lot of situations that the franchise tag gets in the way of for productive contract negotiations, in my opinion.
How many franchise tags would you say that exist a year?
That actually get exercised?
Yes.
I think it should be 0, but it's probably like 5, maybe.
So I rounded up to 6. And if there's 6 franchise tags out of 1,696 players, that is 0.03. So it's less than a full percent of the population of the union. I just believe that they're never going to focus on something that affects that small, those 6 players a year type of deal. They're just going to have to deal with it.
It's more than that. Like, yes, the 5 get exercised, but out of 1,600 players, there's probably 400 that are playing on 1-year deals. And any of those 400 players could have a big year, and the team could choose to franchise tag them other than give them an actual contract. So there's the potential that a fourth of the players could potentially get franchise tagged. Like any of 400 could potentially be franchise tagged.
Right, but there's only 32 possible franchise tags in a year, which is less than 1% of players.
Yes, but the possibility is it's 1 in 400. So, or 32 out of 400. So any of those players could get it of any position. I think the franchise tag shouldn't exist, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole point of why the franchise tag was made was to keep quarterbacks where they were drafted. And we've gotten so far away from that we're in the spot that we are in right now.
Yep. But we can talk about some positive news out here. The Browns activated Marquise Goodwin from the NFI. That's good for him. He's actually going to be paid, but I don't know whether he will stick around on that roster because it is very loaded on the wide receiver group. So he may not actually end up on the final roster for week 1.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. They were really excited for him to be part of this roster. I know that we have the initial 53 right now that we're about to dive into in a few minutes, but there's going to be a whole bunch of roster moves between now and I would say Monday. They'll be pretty set by Monday, would be my guess.
All right. The Cardinals had some interesting quarterback moves leading into week 1. Kyler Murray was placed on the PUP list, so he will be out for the first 4 weeks of the season. For those of you who have actually listened to our videos for a while now, I've predicted that Kyler Murray was going to miss maybe as much as 8 games this season. So already he's going to miss half of those. So only 4 more to go, 50% more to go. Jeff, I think you might have stated that he might play week 1. That's not going to happen. So right now, we're both half, like right down the middle. So we'll see if he comes back week 5, if they switch him over to IR, like what the situation is going to be with Kyler moving forward. if they start 0-4, I can't imagine that they want to risk Kyler getting hurt during the season and either hurt their franchise quarterback or hurt their trade leverage with someone they may want to trade if they get a top 2 pick next draft. So that will be challenging, of course, because he has a ton of guaranteed money, but they may view one of these quarterbacks to be worth that expense. So what do you think about the Kyler Murray situation here?
So we know that it always takes like a generational talent to like make a deal that big to get rid of that much dead cap or get to take on that much dead cap space to get rid of a player like Kyler. But that is on the table with this team. This team just isn't good. I know that you would argue that they are tanking. I don't agree that teams tank in the NFL because I can't imagine a team, a coach, anybody going up to a veteran player and being like, hey, don't give it your all this week. A lot of those players are on 1-year deals, and I just don't think the actual physical conversations of tanking happen between coaches and players because coaches are also coaching for their job next year. I think that Jonathan Gannon is in a really bad spot right now because he is in a spot where it could be another one and done season with the Cardinals. I mean, it just has that volatility to be able to go sideways like that. As far as Kyler, I do anticipate him playing at some point this season. I think it would be really strange if he didn't. So I'll be on the lookout for him to be playing this year. If they are thinking about some sort of tanking, then this would be how you do it. You leave your star quarterback that can win you games on the sideline for the entire year, and then you move forward after the year. It remains to be seen if that's what the Cardinals will be doing. I wouldn't do that if I were them because that does create bad juju, and bad juju will come back and get you some other way. Is that what you think they're doing?
So if they aren't intentionally tanking, they are intentionally rebuilding. And the signs that they're doing that are started with the draft. They traded down with Houston to acquire more picks and get more young players. They have put Kyler Murray on the pup, so they're probably going to lose those 4 games at a minimum. They cut their best veteran backup quarterback in Colt McCoy and acquired Josh Dobbs, who to me is a very unimpressive, uninspiring acquisition. They hired a questionable head coach in John Gannon. I don't think he's a very good defensive coordinator, and I think he's going to be a pretty poor head coach. They're in a very tough division. I cannot see a way that they have a winning season. I think they're going to be a bottom-dwelling team no matter whether they put effort into it or not. So whether or not they are intentionally tanking, they're at least making, in my opinion, bad moves, and they're a bad roster. So effectually, they will end up with a high pick. So whether it's an intentional tank job or whether it's because of bad decisions, they're going to be a bad team.
You know that I got a pick on you here, but will their pick be higher or will their pick from the Texans be higher this year?
Their pick is going to be higher. I don't think that the Texans are going to make the playoffs or anything, but I don't think the Texans are going to be a bottom 5 team.
All right, we will see next week. Next week we are going to release our new final standings for the year. So we're going to see if we made any improvements or changes. We'll be able to see how close you have the Texans and how 0-17ish you have the Cardinals.
It's very hard to go 0-17 completely, so I'm sure they'll get a win or two. The Cardinals also released backup running backs Corey Clement and Tyson Williams. They did bring Clement back on the practice squad, so maybe he can be relevant, but they have not really improved their running back room either. I like John Connor, or James Conner, I should say. Sorry, he's not the Terminator. I like James Conner, but I don't think he by himself is enough. So and he has had injury issues in the past, so I would think that they would want to bring in another quality running back, and they have not done so, in my opinion. That's another reason why I don't think they're going to be good this year.
Yeah, we will see what happens with them. The basically the entire offense is Connor now moving forward, so we're gonna see what happens because the receivers can't throw it to themselves.
Yep. So much for Michael Wilson blowing it up his rookie year. I think he's still going to have some good plays, but he may not be startable this season. Let's go ahead and talk about the last kind of noteworthy item, and then we'll just power through all the league cuts. So the Giants activated Wan'Dale Robinson from the pup, which means they probably are looking to start him early in the season. So he will probably play within the first 4 weeks, maybe not week one, but that's a positive sign for a young wide receiver with a lot of talent. We'll see if he's healthy. We'll see if he gets his game together on the field with Daniel Jones. What do you think of Wan'Dale coming back?
Well, this is a guy that they drafted really high last year. And this year they drafted Jalen Hyatt, who just changed his number to Odell Beckham's former number 13. So I don't know if they're higher or lower on Robinson than Hyatt, but Hyatt is the new toy, and Hyatt has been performing in the preseason and in joint practices. So I anticipate Hyatt having a pretty good year this year, and then Robinson might just be the gadget guy across the field. But I don't really anticipate the Giants having a top 20 wide receiver this year. Like, I just don't see anyone that could do it right now. What are your thoughts on that?
They must like these two young wide receivers because they released the veterans Crowder and Beasley. So they must like these guys more than those savvy veterans. I like Hyatt. I thought he would need more time to adjust to the NFL, but he has played very well so far, and he's more of a speedy guy, so maybe they have him on a limited route tree, which might make it easier for him to adjust. But his athleticism is very apparent every time he's on the field, and he is a type of receiver that I don't think Daniel Jones has played with. He hasn't had a straight line burner like Hyatt, an explosive guy like that. He's played with a lot of slot and gadget guys. So I think he is unique. Him being paired with Waller, who is very good in the middle of the field. I think that Daniel Jones might have one of his better years this year. I know the Giants are certainly hopeful, and anyone in fantasy that has Daniel Jones on their roster is also hopeful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think their offense will be a little bit more high powered this year just based on adding Waller.
Okay, so we can move on to some of our cuts and trades that have happened over the past couple days here. So we've already discussed the Cardinals, the Falcons. There wasn't anything noteworthy. The Ravens, they brought Melvin Gordon back after cutting him, but they signed him to the practice squad. He may stay there. He may get promoted to the active roster again. Don't know. I thought it was kind of curious that the Panthers cut Matt Corral. What do you make of that?
So the Panthers cut Matt Corral, which is interesting after one season, but makes a lot of sense. We talked about this offline before the cut happened that I'm surprised that he's stuck on the roster. Teams just don't find it valuable to carry a third quarterback anymore, especially when you can carry a difference maker on the team. So I think Matt might get snuck back onto the practice squad, or he might go elsewhere to try to continue his NFL career and actually get a real shot to starting.
Yeah, he's someone I sort of liked in his draft process, but that was a bad quarterback year, so I don't think that he's destined for a starting job anytime soon. So he'll probably be a second or third quarterback for somebody out there. Bears didn't really have anything notable. There was rumors that they were going to trade Mooney, but they came out and said that they had no time were offering and shopping Mooney. So they kind of put that to rest. The Bengals, the only thing that the Bengals really did was bring in former Cowboys backup quarterback Greer in, and he's a clear improvement at the backup spot over Simeon, and I think Brown is the other guy there. So he is better than both of those two. Browns, they cut Anthony Schwartz, they cut Jalen Darden, they cut Cade York, and he moved on to the Titans practice squad. So the Browns are clearly changing direction at kicker. A little bit of a surprise for the Cowboys. They cut Malik Davis, and I think a lot of people projected he would make the 53-man final roster. So that was interesting. What do you make of that, and what do you make of the Browns cuts? Anything noteworthy there?
So the Anthony Schwartz one we should notate is an injury cut. So basically he'll revert to IR, but they've already have like a wink, nod that like when he's healthy enough, they'll give him an injury settlement and he'll move on. I love his speed. So I'm interested to see him actually go play with like a real quarterback because he still hasn't had a chance to do that yet because Watson missed a lot of last year and he was a little rusty when he came back. So It would be really interesting if someone Kansas City signed him with that speed, because that speed is like it reminds me of what Tyreek did. I'm not saying that he could be Tyreek. They always love their speed players in Kansas City, and it's a game changer for a wide receiver. Cade York was a surprise because obviously they spent some draft capital on him and then they cut him. So I don't know what's going on there, but they definitely got a trade that will go over for a kicker a little bit later. Malik got tucked back onto the practice squad, so that kind of makes sense with that move now, because before we're like, why would you cut a running back? Because now you're down to just Deuce and Dowell and Pollard. That would make
And
sense if they
Ronald
tucked
Jones.
him.
Let's not forget about Ronald Jones, who's still on the active roster somehow.
He's on the suspended roster, sir.
Well, he's still on the team. He's still on the team.
He is. He still has a helmet and a locker.
Broncos are making all kinds of moves with Sean Payton here. They traded, in my opinion, their best tight end, Albert O, to the Eagles. The Eagles have sorely missed their time where they had two usable tight ends. He is very athletic. He hasn't been able to fully put it together with the Broncos in any of the coaching staffs. So maybe with the Eagles, he will find a home. They also cut their kicker, Brett Mayer, who looks like he's signing with the Rams. And they traded for Will Lutz, former Saints kicker. That was interesting, as well as cut former Saints players, running back Tony Jones and wide receiver Marquise Callaway. So that was interesting. Bring in a Saints guy, send two more out the door. So that was interesting. What do you make of the Broncos moves?
I thought Callaway was for sure going to make the roster, just having that history with Sean Payton. So that was the most interesting. And he's 25, and they've had receiver issues all offseason with Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. And now Albert O makes sense to move on. He just never lived up to the hype of last year. It looks like Troutman and Dulcich had already taken over for him. So Albert O moves on to the Eagles. You did mention that to get back to the two tight ends that they used to have, I think that whole coaching staff has been recycled since that was a thing with Goddard and Ertz. So that does matter a little bit. It's going to be helpful to have some protection of Goddard, because Goddard did go out last year, if you remember correctly, and I didn't feel like they had a suitable replacement for him. So this is some good protection for the Eagles. I expect them to be a high-powered, high-fire offense this year. But Marhe, I cannot believe that he was one of the top like 6 or 7 or 8 kickers last year in all of fantasy, and he just keeps getting moved around this offseason like he was nothing. So just an interesting it's interesting how the league is treating kickers. I know we complain a lot about how they're treating running backs, but it's interesting how the league's treating kickers, who, if you don't have one, you realize it's the most important position on the field.
Special teams, yes. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that he would bring in Will Lutz, who Will Lutz, I think the last couple seasons has had a little bit of issues with kicking. He hasn't, and he's had injury issues. So that's kind of questionable to me. I know he's his guy from the Saints time period, but I just I don't get it. But as far as Albert O to the Eagles, their receiving options outside of their top two wide receivers are to be desired. They're not very good. So Albert O, I think, as a tight end, is a better receiving option than their third and fourth, fifth wide receivers on the Eagles. So that makes sense too. We can talk about real quick the Lions, Packers, and Texans had really no noteworthy moves. Texans is more on the defensive side. We don't really talk about the defense on this podcast. Maybe I could do some solos and talk about defense, but nothing offensively really for those teams. The Colts, we've talked about the Colts with the Jonathan Taylor side. They cut Kenyon Drake, who is a veteran running back they brought in to avoid. He is gone. I don't know if they brought him in the practice squad or not, but they cut James Washington, I thought he might actually stick around with the Colts because they were pretty needy on the wide receiver front, but it's his second cut in 2 weeks. So that's kind of funny. They cut Rashad Perriman. They cut and re-signed Isaiah McKenzie, and they placed tight end Jelani Woods on IR. So those were kind of interesting moves, especially on the wide receiver side.
Yeah, really interesting that I think they're housing 4 wide receivers right now on their roster. So basically, that looks like they'll probably add another wide receiver before week 1. We know the McKenzie cut and re-sign was to get Jelani Woods on the short-term IR first. So Every move has its goal right now, and just because you're cut off a roster doesn't mean that you're not part of the team's plans going forward, as we've learned here.
But maybe they're planning on not throwing the ball that much with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. So maybe they're accounting for that. I don't know. But the
Possible.
Jaguars, yeah, the Jaguars didn't really have anything notable at this point. The Chiefs traded a wide receiver slash kick returner in Amir Smith Marset to the Carolina Panthers. Jeff, is this a good move for the Panthers? Is this good from the Chiefs side? What do you think of this?
We lost our kick returner a couple of weeks ago, so this is actually a really good trade. It's going to go under the radar because he's not going to be fantasy relevant on fantasy rosters. Just a really good guy that to have back there returning those kicks.
Yep. And the Raiders, they cut Philip Dorsett, who looks like he found a home with Denver potentially. They cut Keelan Cole, one of the guys who's perennially popped up in fantasy circles and never did anything. They cut Damian Williams, who they just signed not too long ago. So those are interesting moves, but Josh Jacobs is back. Zamir White is on the team. There's really no space for Damian Williams. Anything that you think noteworthy with those guys?
Oh, so I hope this is the last we hear of Damian Williams because he's been on and off rosters the last few years, and he really makes more work for me on my spreadsheets than he's actually worth at this point. Keelan Cole, interesting cut because he's been on rosters for like the last several years now. So Philip Dorsett, like it seems like he's down to his last few tries, but it's interesting that Denver seems like they're picking Dorsett over Callaway as far as the roster goes, and Callaway had that history with Sean Payton. So it's a little puzzling to be honest, but whatever. Denver will do whatever Denver wants to do right now.
All right. So the Chargers and Rams, nothing really notable there. The Dolphins finally cut Myles Gaskin after having 27 running backs on the roster. They finally cut one, and he signed with Minnesota. So he'll probably be one of the backups there behind Madison. And it's interesting that he's filling in the role for recently cut McBride, who I think McBride is a better player. Miami also cut Chosen Anderson, which I saw coming. And they did a surprise tight end cut, Tyler Croft. That's someone you thought might actually have an okay year with Miami. Now he's no longer there.
Yeah, I really thought that he was going to make the roster, but obviously it just wasn't in the cards this year. But Myles Gaskin goes to Minnesota, and I do think that he's going to be the primary backup to Madison now. He doesn't really fit the cousins and sons that we talked about earlier. Anderson would have been better to go to go to Minnesota, but
Well,
yeah,
well, there.
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say there is space for him. They cut Jalen Rager along with Dwayne McBride, so there is potentially a wide receiver spot for Anderson to go there too.
Right. And they snuck McBride back onto their practice squad. But yesterday was really interesting because there was a lot of rumors and reports coming out about Jalen Reagor going possibly via trade somewhere. Like there was a lot of inquiries about trades with him, and then he got cut today. So it makes me think that these either were false reports or people weren't really that interested in him. Or there's a wink, wink, nod, nod deal that they're going to bring him back or tuck him onto the practice squad, one or the other.
Maybe, Jeff. Maybe this was all part of the deal for Justin Jefferson. He's like, sign this guy and then cut him. He was drafted the pick in front of me. I'm holding a grudge. I want you to cut this guy. Maybe that's all it is.
100%. I mean, that's how you do it. You got to be a little bit petty.
All right. The Patriots, after they previously signed Zeke Elliott, they traded Pierre Strong to the Browns, which was interesting. It tells me the Browns aren't happy with their backup situation, and clearly the Patriots weren't very happy with Pierre Strong because they sent him out the door. They also traded their kicker Nick Folk to Tennessee, which I thought was interesting. They cut the almost starter Bailey Zappi and then brought him back on the practice squad, as well as they cut Malik Cunningham, which was also very interesting. So they were down to one quarterback and just Mac Jones. So hopefully that's a sign of confidence in Mac Jones. I do hear rumors that they may be interested in Colt McCoy, who the Cardinals released. I think he'd be a pretty good backup. Someone threw out that they may be waiting to trade for Brian Hoyer. which I think would be hilarious.
I heard that
His
as
third,
well. So yeah.
but they also cut disappointment Ty Montgomery, and they cut Anthony Berkshire, who is going to be at least the third or fourth tight end on the roster anyway, so that makes sense. He may find a new home, maybe with a division rival like Miami, who might be looking for a tight end. Jeff, what do you think of all these moves? Some of them are
Oh
pretty
boy.
interesting.
Usually the Patriots like their tight ends, and it didn't make sense to me that they cut Ferkshire here because he was for sure going to be their third string tight end. At least that's what I had thought. Could see the Dolphins picking up a tight end, but they do have Dylan Smythe that I think that they really like. No one really knows too much about him because they don't really use their tight end a lot. It's just kind of the way that the Dolphins play right now with a lot more receivers fast, and they like the speed, and they prefer their tight ends to be blocking tight ends. Zappy was an interesting thing. I would laugh about the Hoyer thing as well. They finally got rid of Nick Folk, who was actually like a top 10 scorer the last several years in fantasy to Tennessee. And I don't know if he has as much fantasy relevance in Tennessee or if their young kicker, who Bill Belichick really doesn't like to go with young kickers. I think it's Chad Ryland. He doesn't really like to go with young kickers. He's drafted and cut them before for like a Nick Folk type, but this time he decided to go with the rookie. So this is telling me that this kicker might actually be the real deal.
Do you think that them cutting Anthony Berkshire is a positive development for both Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki? Gesicki, who's battling an injury right now, maybe he's close to being back, and that's why they pulled the trigger on Berkshire?
For sure, for Ferkshire, absolutely that this is actually good for their fantasy value. I do think Mac Jones really likes to use the tight ends, and he likes to use, so he's going to use Henry, he's going to use Gesicki. I think there's going to be a lot of 2 tight end sets, and then there's going to be a lot of 3 receiver sets because they also threw Thornton on IR today, so he's going to miss the first 4 games. So their speedsters out, so they're going to have to regroup with Parker and Smith Schuster, and there was even some trade offers for Kendrick Bourne as well, from what I was hearing, but the Patriots said they wouldn't trade him, so I'm assuming he's their 3 entering the season.
Booty, the rookie out of LSU as well. So I think they probably like their wide receivers. Whether they should, that's a different discussion. The Saints, as we discussed, they traded Will Lutz to Denver, and they're moving forward with Blake Groupie, which is an interesting name. So I think he might be a rookie, or at least not someone I'm familiar with before this, because I'm not familiar with every kicker. But that was
You better get
really
familiar. He is a rookie.
he was really the only notable movement here with the Saints. The Giants, as we discussed, they cut Jamison Crowder, they cut Cole Beasley, they also cut James Robinson after recently acquiring him. As you discussed, Jalen Hyatt changed his jersey number from 84 to OBJ's 13. So he is either signaling something or he is setting goals for himself. Either way, it is very interesting, and hopefully he can be that feature in the offense. So along with Waller.
I grabbed Hyatt as a bench stash yesterday in a deeper bench draft, and I expect him to get better as the year goes on. I like the move. It's a bold move. The James Robinson move was a little bit puzzling because, like, what do they have behind Barkley? Are they sticking with just Matt Breida and then Eric Gray? I just don't feel like that's enough. James Robinson would have been a nice little insurance piece there, but maybe he'll be back. He did have a decent preseason from what I had saw from his tape, but obviously not enough to make the roster.
I think they're probably waiting for these teams with the logjam at running back to cut one of these guys, like the Eagles or the Dolphins, someone like them, to cut one of their running backs, because any of those would be an upgrade behind Barkley, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Well, the Jets cut one of their running backs. They cut Zonovan Knight. He did find a home on Detroit practice squad. I don't know if he'll ever break into the active roster, but it is a nice depth stash for the Lions. And it makes sense. The Jets had too many running backs with Dalvin Cook coming to town. The Eagles cut Trey Sermon. He has not found a home yet. Maybe he'll end up with the Giants behind Barkley. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, first they gotta release him from the IR. It was a cut injured situation, kind of like Anthony Schwartz. I think there's a wink, wink, nod, nod that they're going to come up with an injury settlement for him, and he'll be soon moving on to a new team, but not until that settlement is reached. So he's kind of held hostage, just like Schwartz is right now.
Yep. Steelers, there wasn't much on the offensive front. Again, they had some defensive moves, but we don't talk about defense on here. The 49ers, they moved Cameron Latu, their rookie tight end, to IR. And they also cut Chris Conley, who is bounced around from roster to roster.
This is a Super Bowl roster, as we've discussed earlier. Latu, I don't think was a this year move, so it just kind of gets him an extra year to get up to speed, potentially take over for Kittle at some point. Conley was an interesting cut because I thought that he could easily have been the fourth wide receiver, but clearly they have some optimism around Danny Gray, maybe. He's a second-year player that I like. And then they have Jawan Jennings, who I actually like as well. This is Ayuk's contract year, so this is really interesting to mention right now. So Ayuk could go off because it's his contract year, and also what are the 49ers going to do at that position after this year?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because they're pretty close to the cap, and they are trying to re-sign Nick Bosa on the defensive side. So they may not have the money to pay Ayuk if he blows up this year. He could be on a different team next year.
He probably will be.
All right, Seattle and Tampa Bay both didn't have anything notable. The Titans, they cut Michael Badgley in accordance with that Nick Folk trade, and they also moved Hassan Haskins to the commissioner's exempt list and the IR. Haskins was supposed to be the backup behind Henry. He has not looked great, and he's got off the field issues. He also has an injury. I don't think that he's someone that after this year is going to be on the Titans, especially with both the rookie Tajay Spears and Chestnut looking really good in the preseason. So I don't think he's someone long for the Titans or the league at this point.
No, I completely agree with that. It's just really interesting that he pretty much got put on two separate lists that have him out for the year. So he is double out for the year.
Yeah, that was interesting. Usually you just do one or the other, but the commissioner's exempt list is probably a temporary solution, and IR is probably the season-long one, in my opinion.
So the rumor is that they wanted to throw him on the commissioner exempt list to keep him away from the facilities during rehab and all of that stuff while he figures out that court case. Because he could be rehabbing and everything and be with the team, even if he's on IR. So the rumor is that they threw him on the commissioner exempt list to just get him out of that situation.
I don't blame him. You don't want someone who probably actually did something pretty bad to actually be affiliated with the team. So I get that. Lastly, we have the Commanders. They cut Jarrett Patterson. I don't think we know if he was signed back to the practice squad yet or not, but he's someone that people have pinpointed on as potentially a Gibson replacement at some point. And I don't think he's quite put it together and stayed healthy both. So we'll see if he sticks on the roster.
Yeah, he hasn't been signed yet. I don't know. This could be his last chance to make it. I know he went to UB, so I've always followed his career because I also went to UB. So I think this will be the last time we talk about Jarrett Patterson, unless it's like a week 16 or week 17 pickup for a fantasy championship matchup.
That does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for listening and downloading this episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle at N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, and Threads. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.